Hello and welcome to Risk Chats with AFERM. I'm your host, Paul Marshall. Today, Tal and I will be speaking with Bob Westbrooks. He's from the PBGC OIG. He is the OIG, and we'll be talking about their unique approach to risk management, ERM, both the OIG program itself as well as how the IG has worked with the rest of the agency to make recommendations and kind of provide an interesting take on how IG and agency management can work together to really focus on risk management. So without further ado, let's go to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. So today we have with us the Inspector General from the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. Did I get that right, Bob?
You got it right.
Okay, I always get that one messed up. And also our co-host today is Tal. Hello, Tal.
Good morning on a good chilly December.
That's right. Okay, well today we want to talk about PBGC's, IG's unique, I would say sort of a unique approach to ERM at your agency. So why don't we just start off a little bit about yourself, Bob, your background, and why you're interested in this topic.
So I was appointed back in May 2015, appointed to be the IG at PBGC. I'm one of the rarities in the community in that I grew up in the community. So I started out at the bottom, and I actually cycled through all of the job discipline. So I started out as I'm a lawyer by training. I started out as a criminal investigator, spent most of my time as an investigator. Then transferred into a counsel function. And while I was doing that, I went back and earned my CPA because fraud's all about the money and following the paper trails, and I have a strong interest in auditing. And so after bouncing around to a couple of different agencies, large and small, and gaining some experience, I was ultimately selected to be the Deputy IG at Small Business Administration. I was there for a bit, and then before I was appointed to PBGC.
Great. Yeah, that's a great background for this for sure, right? Law and the accounting side. It's rare that you get both of those around here. But
Bob, real quick, can you just give our listeners a background on the mission and the scope of resources PBGC has control over?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we're a very relatively small, little-known federal agency. We're actually one of the largest federal corporations. We have about $120 billion under investment management. We're responsible for the retirement security of about 35 million Americans in defined benefit private sector pension plans. And we pay out about $6 billion a year in pension benefits. It's on the radar politically and with our stakeholders because one of our two pension plans is running out of money, and projections are to run out of money by the end of 2025, and there needs to be a legislative solution to this.
So if I get this right, the overall mission of the agency is to take over management of failed pensions? Yeah,
when pensions become insolvent, we single employer plans, we trustee them, we take over their assets, we pay participants up to a federal guarantee amount. And for union plans, when they become insolvent and don't have enough money to pay out benefits, we actually provide money to them in the form of financial assistance, and it's framed as a loan.
Mm-hmm. Well, it definitely sounds like somewhere that you'd want an enterprise risk management program, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Any risk there?
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us about that? I feel like, like I said, there's a sort of a unique approach in that you guys are very active in this ERM world. You even have your own programs in the IG, but maybe tell us a little bit about what your approach has been to ERM at the agency, or corporations are.
Yeah, so the Congress created a statutory chief risk officer function in 2012 for PBGC, and it was the result of a couple of things. One was PBGC's two insurance programs have been on GAO's high risk list, one of them since 2003. Secondly, our office, before I got there, the 2011-12 timeframe, did some pretty impactful audit work with some significant findings highlighting some operational risks involved in two major plans that we took over, United Airlines and National Steel. And after highlighting these operational risks and the nature of our governance structure, Congress decided that, hey, you need a chief risk officer to surface these risks and to communicate them to the board. in addition to having an IG. And so they created this function. I got there in 15 and it still had not been filled. There was an acting director for a number of years, and for a variety of reasons, they elected not to fill that position. This was an obvious place for me to start, and it's one of these things you try as an inspector general. You try to use the tools that you have available to persuade management to do what you think is the right thing to do. And there's already a statutory mandate, so an audit recommendation makes absolutely zero sense. So one of our first orders of business was to do some research in this area. And this was, again, going back, this was well before A123 and was enacted in 2016. So we did some research around the community, and clearly there's leaders out there, right? You have IRS, Department of Education, and some other agencies that have, had robust ERM programs for a number of years.
Early on, right?
Yeah, in addition to, at the state level, a kind of a similar organization would be the California Public Pension System for us.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So we did a white paper. We did some research, and we're saying, okay, we wanted to, number one, demystify ERM as a concept. We wanted to remove any barriers or obstacles for management, creating this position by giving them examples of how it's been successful in other agencies, and structurally what it would look like, and then also to provide to the board what the benefits of ERM would be. So part of what we did was, and this is all open source stuff, was getting from CalPERS the reports that they provide to the board quarterly on their risks and their heat maps and
Bob,
and risk
Who
profile.
was the target of your white papers? What was the audience?
That's a great question. It was really the board and senior management for that. This was a way to create public accountability, to say, here's the benefit, board, if you persuade management, let management know that this is an important mandate that needs to be filled. And so within 2 weeks they did.
Seems like a lot more friendly way to communicate than management advisory comments or an audit report.
Right.
I mean, how did you guys circle around as the white paper, as the venue, as an IG tool?
So, like I said, a recommendation wouldn't be terribly productive. They know that they have to do this. One of the organizations I spent some time in is the Postal Service Office of Inspector General, which is a very progressive office. And they're one of the other agency OIGs out there that do white papers because they've got the resources to do this. So there was a model that we had for that. But it was, and looking back at the benefit of almost 5 years now, this report really is very symbolic to me because it was really the first public report that I had as IG, and I think it was constructive. It had its desired mission or desired result in that an acting chief risk officer was named about 2 weeks after I issued the report to the board after a 3-year time frame. And it set the tone for management for our journey through ERM, is that we believe our role is to champion this with management, and we can be allies. We shouldn't be adversaries.
Right. And speaking of that, so you got the results of the appointment quickly thereafter, but what kind of feedback did the board or senior managers give you? Did they reach out and give you feedback regarding the white paper format?
Yeah, we did. It was very favorable feedback in the sense of it's where you're not just telling us something we already know. You actually went out and did research and said, here's how it looks at Department of Ed or IRS, or here's what CalPERS is doing. So nobody has time for that. And really, for us to provide that thought leadership, I thought was very beneficial.
And that was, you said, back in 2016 or after that? What
was that was 2015 when we did that. Yeah.
So have things been stood up now then in a risk office and all that?
Yeah, so after an acting chief risk officer was named, then the next step was to select and name a permanent one. And we provided some guidance. That was the second thing we did, which there's no public report of, but I'm proud of it. The working with the board, next step, right, is create a position description and figure out organizationally where this role should be. And there was an initial attempt to go a certain direction with the chief risk officer. It's clear we've got major financial risks, and there seems to be there's different skill sets you can look for in a chief risk officer, and they were relying heavily, almost exclusively, on going down an actuarial route. which would bypass all of the operational risks that Congress was concerned about and our own and the financial statement auditors were concerned about.
Right.
So I prepared a memo for the board, which researched private sector, where the CRO function typically is, and what are the skill sets and knowledge that the private sector they're looking for, what are desirable certifications, education experience, that sort of thing. And management actually they canceled the initial vacancy announcement, redid the position description, and based upon this research, reposted and ultimately filled the position.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's, again, to me, unique. IG's really, you're providing this kind of, we want to help out with this. You want to be to be successful.
Complementary services.
Absolutely. It's not just we're here to audit you and get you, like that. People think of the IG like that, but you're trying to be very collaborative here in a way.
We are, but at the same token, we maintain our independence in fact and appearance at all times, and I guard that very closely because oversight in a small agency is a very intimate business, so we have to sort of exaggerate those lines of independence. I think, and particularly in the IT security area, management would say we're very hard graders. We're fair, but we're hard, and I don't apologize on behalf of our participants for that.
So what are some other the products that you guys have put out there? So there was some other white papers too, other subject matter areas, right?
Yeah, so we did another white paper, which is an area of concern for all financial managers, is improper payments. And for us, improper payments are, our money going out is participant payments. And most folks that have been in the business for a while know that the gaps and deficiencies in the federal death master file.
Right.
And so that was one, and there's a whole host of reasons for that, but that can't be the exclusive tool for management to use to identify paying dead people, which from a financial side of it, the risks aren't terribly high because the guarantee amount, sadly, for our nation's seniors is relatively small. It's the reputational risk of identifying you've been paying a dead person for a number of years.
Right.
So we did, after we did some casework in this area, and we used some new legislative tools to detect fraud. We used our data matching tools. And so we identified a number of deceased participant cases, and the result of that, it's great to report out and to terminate benefits and seek recoupment and to get criminal charges, but we should be learning from that experience. And the way to learn from, what's the lessons learned here? The lessons learned was there are gaps in the death master file. We were able to find these people using these approaches. Here are some red flag indicators of fraud that we urge management to consider moving forward and implement them into their business processes so we can collectively drive down improper payments and fraud involving this program.
So as monitoring as a big ERM standard for risk, you mentioned that you applied some data analytics for some new solutions. Can you give us a little war story or a success story on the new approach that you guys applied?
So with the IG Empowerment Act a couple of years back, Congress created the exception for the Data Matching Act to give IGs the authority to bump data up against other agencies, IG to IG. So we used our data, bumped it up against HHS data. And the premise was, and we took certain tranches of ages because we've got 800,000 people we're paying, so we wanted to pilot it, see if it was workable. And we're assuming that, if somebody's over the age of 100 in active pay status and they haven't had a Medicare claim within the last 3 years, they're either in extraordinarily good health or they're not. So we identified those that were not
in health status at all.
No health status, and those people popped out pretty quickly in the data.
Right.
And then we use our additional subpoena power tools then to go to the state vital statistics offices, which the agency doesn't have that. And we obtain the death certificates or any other evidence that we need to establish that this person is in fact. We would never want to cut somebody off or delay a payment.
Right.
If it was even a close call, we want to make sure that the proof is absolute on that. So we get the certified death certificate and then we report those back to management. To date, we have, I think it's 178 cases where we've found deceased participants. Some of these, a few of them are just lag time with the death master file, but a number of them for a variety of reasons. It could be a transposed date of birth or SSN. They're not being flagged at the federal level. So.
And those folks were cashing checks, were they?
Yeah.
Or somebody.
Somebody, family member. Yep.
Wow. So, as far as, so it sounds like you guys, have several different products besides just straightforward audit reports and things that you use to kind of spread that risk management culture around. So how about, I heard about this thing, these risk advisories. Can you tell us a little bit about what's a risk advisory?
Sure, absolutely. Before I do, I think it's critical to underscore. None of these alternative, non-traditional IG products that we issue have impacted our audit work. We're still issuing audit reports with binding recommendations and driving change. So I think that's critical to underscore. For our risk advisories, though, one of the things, right, management needs timely information to deal with risk. And it's easy for us sometimes to say, you got a risk over here, without offering some degree of like a suggestion to say, here's how, if we were in your shoes, here's how we would perhaps fix this. So we're dealing with operational risks at a relatively low level, fixable things, right? Fixable problems. So we decided to issue risk advisories. For some, they would look a lot like a management advisory, but if you look at them closely, tonally, they're different than a management advisory. They're not just pointing out deficiencies. They're really saying, hey, you have a risk here. We want to point this out to you, and here's a way that you can fix this. It's a non-binding audit recommendation. So what we found, ironically, and we're very grateful for this, management has fixed those problems 100% of the time at a much higher degree and response rate than on a binding recommendation because of the collaborative nature. Now, we don't go through the full audit process with them, but we do. I will submit drafts to them for technical comments, and I'll work with them. If they think that another solution is better, we certainly will consider that. But most of these are public reports. They're on our website. A few of them are not in the IT security area. But we've gotten really, really good results on the risk advisories. We've done them regarding authentication for our public website, where we've encountered cases of fraud, of identity theft. We've done them on contracting issues for oversight of our contract workforce, which we have a significantly large workforce. We've done them on other procurement matters, on evaluations of bid proposals. We've done a number of them, and we get a very quick turnaround, but they're relatively short, much more narrow in scope. But again, unlike a management advisory, which is really sort of often, and they're important from a public policy standpoint, they're critical, and as a community we have to do them, they're frequently intended to sound the alarm. Risk advisories are really not sounding an alarm. It's more like a weather forecast that it might rain, bring your umbrella with you. That's really the tone and the intent of the risk advisories.
Having set us on the management side of the table, in the back of your mind, I was thinking, wow, all right, so this is an advisory. I would expect if we don't hit down this line and the conditions don't get resolved, then that could turn into something more formal. And that's a great incentive to just make it go away or make sure you get your focus on it and get some action on it early. I think that sounds like a great tool.
That's exactly the conversations that we had early on. I said, this is the approach I'm going to take. Understand I can always go back and revisit this, and I will revisit this if they're not fixed, and not in a threatening manner, but in a constructive manner.
Management knows that. I mean, you don't even have to say it.
Yeah,
they're like, it's understood.
I understood. Yep.
So I do want to talk a little bit about audits, and maybe this is a broader conversation than just the corporation. But I know you're part of the. Are you part of the SIGI, the Inspector General group? Council?
Yeah. So every IG by statute, all 73 of us are a member of the council. Then within the council of IGs, we have elections for certain committees, standing committees. So, and then if you're a chair of a committee, you're on the executive council. So I'm the chair of the professional development committee and on the executive council for SIGI.
Okay. Well, and from that perspective, from your IG's office or the other IGs you've seen, how are folks auditing ERM programs out there in the federal government? Is there good guidance now for that, or what's the status of that?
And as a follow-up question, and we were at the AFERM Summit, I think it was 2 years ago, and GAO had a session, and they said they were developing guidance that was going to come out and be implemented through the SIGIs. Are you aware, is that coming down the road? Is it right around the corner?
Yeah. So we have an interesting relationship with GAO, and we coordinate our work with them. We have, though, our own guidance that is coming out that, I suppose, it's certainly being looked at by GAO, but I don't know that it would be accurate to say it's a sort of a joint venture. Right. Mm-hmm. So we've got two things that SIGI has out. We're very proud that in October we approved a practitioner's guide for OIGs to implement ERM, and I can talk about that in a little bit.
Yep. Within IG offices.
Within IG offices, because we are many agencies, micro agencies with all the functions of a large agency. And so we want to, and there's the other piece of it as a community, the folks that are true believers of ERM, there's this idea of like that will build our expertise in evaluating agency ERM programs and develop that empathy of knowing from the management side how the uncertainty oftentimes with managing your own risks. So we developed a pretty detailed practitioner's guide, and that was led by Jessica Southwell and Tamika Edwards, Jessica from Department of Labor and Tamika from HHS OIG. What was fascinating about that guide was it was a grassroots effort. There was no IG, there was no executive council that commissioned it to say, develop this. This was at the staff level, ERM, OIG professionals that says, we need this.
Right.
And they developed it, and we're very thankful that they did.
Is that a draft or now effective?
That is final, it's effective, and it's on our website. In addition to that, we're in the final stages of approving guidance for OIGs to evaluate agencies' ERM programs. And that, restates a lot of the criteria out there. It expands a little bit on, the playbook, and it gives auditors the ground rules, if you will. But within that, there's tremendous flexibility, as with anything with audits. An IG has to have the independence to scope a job as they see fit within their agency. So it's pretty broad guidance, but at least sets forth the criteria, and that's going to come out, I think, in January.
Well, speaking of criteria, it's pretty fundamental to all audits, right? So if there's a law, there's a reg. What if you don't have that? Best practices, things like that, standards. I mean, what do you guys have for criteria for?
That's exactly it, right? And that's it goes back to Yellow Book government auditing standards, and your highest criteria is going to be your firm's most firm criteria is going to be written standards, written law, that sort of thing. But best practices can be considered industry best practice. So the
CFO and Performance Improvement Council joint ERM playbook, is that criteria?
It would be considered criteria. Yeah.
Best practice sort of standard, maybe something close to a standard.
There's a little bit in A11 on ERM. Is that
a little bit?
Is that in the soup?
Yeah, all of that.
All
yeah,
those
and
it's A123. Yeah.
And it's and what is challenging for management sometimes, and there's new guidance that OMB is working on now that they some folks wanted to specifically designate it as non-criteria, and we say you can't really do that.
Say that one more time.
They wanted to. Some folks originally thought, well, maybe to foster adoption of this, we want to specifically put in this that it cannot be used as criteria by auditors.
Now, what is this? Are you talking about the agency's implementation policy at the agency level?
Yeah, exactly. This would be sort of new information or guidance to help agencies implement their programs. And folks said, well, if we want to get, and at one level it makes sense. The point was, we want to get agencies to adopt this, and so we don't want it to come as a cost. So perhaps if we designate it as non-eligible as audit criteria, folks will use it without fear. And my position on it, and I made it clear, and I mean, that just can't happen. Now the degree to which we rely upon it as criteria and in which we use it to create recommendations, that's a different matter. But
and just to make sure I'm understanding, when you use it, or make sure our pronouns are clear, they don't want to use it. You're talking about the agency's own developed implementation of other external standards.
Correct.
Here's our guidebook. Here's how we do our registers, and make our agency profile and go through the ERM cycle. Okay.
That is the it. Yes.
All right. So at places where managers are at, I know the one thing they're interested in is when they have risk registers where they're applying the process, and then they have the agency process for distilling down the the dirty dozen or the agency profile of the most severe risks for senior managers. Will the risks in registers and the risk management identifies and profiles, will they be subject to audit?
So this is ground zero in terms of the conflict between management and the oversight community that has been the issue since I've been involved in this issue since before A123 was enacted, when
Right.
the community was getting together to talk about what A123 should look like. This has been an issue that has continued for a variety of reasons involving the statutory role and independence of an IG. I don't know that there's going to be as clear a guidance as people want on it. And it fundamentally it's going to come down to the professional judgment of independent IGs, but we could never sanction anything where any agency information is firewalled off and you can't look at that. But
Fair enough.
but if you understand, the nature of our work, we develop our annual audit plans and we develop our risks, and it's really more, I think, there's a lot of fear out there. But I think at best it's going to be used as cross-checking each other's understanding of risks. I don't
And
know.
perspectives,
And
really.
perspectives.
Because one's on the inside and one is the independent, less biased on the outside, and both of them bring different strengths to the perspective.
That's absolutely fair observation. But there's very few instances where, and maybe I'm overly optimistic on this. I can just speak to PBGC. We generally know. We share a common understanding of risk. There might be a difference between, is that your number 2 or 3?
Yeah.
But we have a common understanding. There's no risk where like, I never thought of that, because management does this for a living. They know their job.
However, putting those two side by side and discovering that is true, or when in fact there are some serious perspective differences, ought to lead to a very valuable conversation between senior leaders in the IG.
That should, and I think the healthiest environment is when senior leadership looks at that, has that reporting relationship with their CRO function, with the IG, that they look at that and say, you know what, I need independent audit on X issue. I need to know if this is a real risk or not.
Right, because within management, as people are implementing and as agencies' ERM program gets more mature, in the back of every manager's level, and sometimes probably more at the staff level, and then as it moves up through the mid, it changes, is a perceived reluctance to get very candid and very clear on both the description and assessment of risks, thinking that it will lead to it'll lead to the next IG's action. So I think probably like you're talking about, the senior leaders articulating the value of having it come up clear and then compared to what the IG is where a lot of the real value actually occurs for the senior leaders.
Yeah. And I obviously can't speak for large, highly political cabinet level agencies with a lot of working parts. I can speak to a large single mission federal corporation. We just don't have that concern. So I want to highlight that as it's possible out there that you can work shoulder to shoulder independently at arm's length and candidly share information and it not result in tremendous pain. It results in value, really the transfer of risk information between the two functions at our agency.
So I think one of the last areas for you here, I want you to talk a little bit about the IG's ERM program. I'm just curious to get to know a little better. What are you all doing there? What have you learned from implementing that?
So we wanted to get out in front of this, and so once in 2016, once A123 was getting firmed up, I wanted as an office to be a leader and lead by example and implement before the guidance even actually came out. And so I'm a small office of 25 people, but we have all the functions of a larger agency. And it's the exact same concept whether you're doing for 25 or 25,000. And we wanted to implement ERM, to educate ourselves, and also, as the head of the agency, I wanted to get my arms around the risks. Like, what are the things that are keeping me up at night? Mm-hmm. I need to prioritize what's important, what can I deal with today, and what can I put off till tomorrow. So
prioritization,
and we just did it. And so and we put some I think, candid and unusual language in our risk management framework, and acknowledging that we're at the initial stages and that this is unabashedly imprecise and imperfect, but we'll let experience be our guide and go by trial and error and strive to get better every year, and that's what we've done. So our first year, we started out with, I think, 43 risks across our organization, and we prioritized, and I learned some great lessons learned through that process, which ultimately is going to inform how we scope out an audit of the agency's program. But that led to fascinating conversations, because I did that at the same time the agency was doing that. So I remember being at a board meeting, and the chairman of the board, who's the Secretary of Labor, said, "So tell me about your risks, Bob." And I said, "Well, we've got 43 risks identified." And he asked management, and they said, "Well, we've got 9 risks identified, 9 or 10. And he's like, "I don't quite understand how that works. It seems to me there should be a larger number of risks at the agency level. Perhaps you need to go back and look at this again." And that, I believe, caused management to go back and give it another effort. 43 was a lot for us, and so we got it down. We looked at and we prioritized to our top 10. One of which, right, and it's always a challenge in the IG community at a smaller office, is maintaining a really high level of staff competency. So training was one of our highest risks. So not everything comes at a cost. So it's like, where do I want to spend our time and our corporate energy on administrative projects to raise up our competencies level? And so we developed a number of steps for our mitigating strategies, and then we just went about implementing that year, and we did it for the top 10. And then year 2, it's like, well, year 1 was very staff driven by me, and so year 2 it was like, okay, this, to be successful and have continuity, I need to push this down to the next level. So we delegated it to my deputy IG. We firmed up our criteria on our risk appetite and risk tolerance, and we put some a lot more clear definitions on our risks, so people that were assessing them knew exactly what we were driving at. And then the big thing we learned was that it's really shouldn't be a democratic process. Not everybody has the same perspective in assessing risk, and we learned that. And we also learned a 3-point scale doesn't give you a lot of very dispersed data. So I don't know if this is a mathematically or technical term, but we figured out I needed a 5-point scale to declump the data. And then we targeted our surveys is what we did.
And I hear I have some experience on the democratic. Democracy is a great way to reach the median. However, risks tend to be a little bit more on the extremes. Those are what you're looking for. And by doing a lot of group voting on the severity or probabilities of risk, where there's great variance of people's personal, professional knowledge about the specifics of it, it's like you only want you want to at least weight much more heavily those people that are close to that piece of the process and those those factors. Otherwise, it's like everything tends to go. If you're on a 5-point scale, everything's a 3. And
that's exactly.
And it kind of dilutes it all out.
That's an excellent point. And so that, year 1, seeing the data in its preliminary nature, we said we have to normalize this a little bit and weigh it with managers that are closer to the risk, for example. Where the democratic part comes in, and it is very important, we've got a category of risks, or human capital risks, and a lot of the data that informs that risk are FEV scores, and that's clearly an area where everybody, one person, one vote kind of thing, and it's important to know kind of what is the average, but that's just one data element. Other risks, we are looking for the outliers. It's a great point.
Okay, well, Bob, this is a great risk chat. I really appreciate you joining us today, and I think we could talk for a few more hours here, but I think we'll cut it at 30 minutes. But thanks again for coming in, and I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for
guys.
sharing.
Thank you.
That's the show. Thanks for tuning in. Happy New Year, happy holidays to everybody. This is our first show of the new year. Have plenty more to come, of course. So tune in. AFERM.org. Have a little podcast page there. If you have any suggestions, you know who to ask. And until next time, this is Paul Marshall signing off for Risk Chats with AFERM.